My name is Andrew Kirschmann. I am a student at Moody Bible Institute studying pastoral ministry. I'm so glad to be with y'all here tonight. I just love getting to go through topics with y'all and talk through the hard things. It's really a joy. So over the past few weeks, we've spent a lot of time deconstructing hot topic issues, such as celebrity pastors, segregation in the church, and toxic church cultures. But tonight, I want to flip the script a little bit. Tonight, I want to take the next step in the process of reshaping our faith, and that is reconstruction. The idea that I want to help reconstruct tonight is the practice that most of us fail in, and that is the practice of rest. We so often throw the practice of rest to the wayside. Culture around us pushes us to constantly be busy and to keep working until we burn out. As I was going about my daily life today, I saw a commercial and it was a commercial about working until you burn out. And that's what it literally said, which is great because that's exactly what I wanted to talk about tonight. The business moguls of the world are often held in high regard because of this work ethic. We see the success of those who are on the news and all over social media, and we want to have that. This idea of working for recognition is seductive and it pulls us in. But it's not just recognition, it's also peer pressure. If people around us are working nonstop, then it makes us want to as well. We want to make sure that people don't get ahead of us or outperform us. We see the reward of workaholism in the form of raises and promotions. Who wouldn't want that? And to go even further, the concept is not only in the business world of working till you burn out, but it consumes the church as a whole. Pastors, especially those who run large churches, are often pushed to their limits to try and grow their church. This will lead them to burn out and hurt the congregation a lot of different ways. Some of those ways can be a loss of passion for the church community. And so they can lose what it means to lose or for their passion that they had when they first came into the church. Churches will also hire people who are hard workers, but maybe they don't have the heart behind what they're doing. They can produce numbers and good statistics, but when this happens, the church becomes a business rather than a church. As a result of that, we see less people's needs being met and more focus on growth and expansion of things like a physical building or attendance numbers. And speaking of the congregation, the church will often stretch their volunteers thin and squeeze as much as they can get out of them for not paying them anything. This often results in congregants feeling used and not cared for. And when this happens, people tend to leave the church because the church is not reflecting the true meaning of a Christian community. Now, don't get me wrong. What I'm not saying is that work is bad. Work was something that was created since humans were made. What I am saying is that because of this culture of workaholism, we don't recognize the importance of rest. In fact, by not resting, we are straight out ignoring scriptural commandments. So, what does the Bible say about rest? There are a few key stories that I want to look at. The first story I want to draw your attention to is from the very beginning of it all, creation. As most of us who went to Sunday school know, the story goes that God created the world in 6 days. But I want you to read with me what happens on day 7 in Genesis chapter 2, verses 2 and 3. It says, "By the 7th day, God had finished the work he had been doing. So, on the 7th day, he rested from all his work. Then God blessed the 7th day and made it holy because on it he rested from all of the work of creating that he had done." Now, what's important about this is that God did not need to rest. After all, he's an all-powerful being. That means he was never tired. So why did God rest? Well, in the reading of the Hebrew of this passage, it simply suggests that he stopped working, again, not because he was tired, and that he took time to look at his creation, reflect on it, and declare that it was very good. This holy day that God set aside in verse 3 will later be called the Sabbath, when God gives Moses the 10 Commandments. During this Sabbath day, the people of Israel were called to rest and reflect on what God had done for them. Something important to notice is that the commands that God gives are not just for fun either. There's a purpose to every single one of them. A lot of the commands that are given were to help benefit not just the spiritual health of the people of Israel, but also the physical health. Because after all, God designed us. Wouldn't he know how we work? So this idea of the Sabbath is not only meant to be a spiritual time of reflection, but a time to physically rest and recharge. The next story I want to look at is that of Jesus himself, because even Jesus built a habit of resting. Look with me in Mark 1, 35 through 39, which we read at the beginning. And it says, "In rising very early in the morning, while it was still dark, he departed and went out to a desolate place. And there he prayed. And Simon and those who were with him searched for him, and they found him and said to him, 'Everyone is looking for you.' And he said to them, 'Let us go on to the next towns, that I may preach there also, for this is why I came out.' And he went through all of Galilee, preaching in the synagogues and casting out demons." For context of this passage, Jesus, right before this passage, was healing a multitude of people. He was walking from town to town, doing miracles and being in community with people. And obviously, I would imagine it's very tiring to do. So Jesus went out and went to rest. What I think is awesome about this story right here is that right after Jesus had finished resting and spending that time with God, he went out and literally cast out demons. Now, a good power nap might not let you cast out demons, but this is something to be noticed. So, both God and Jesus rested, and were given a commandment to rest. But how can we rest if we don't really know how? Well, luckily for us, I think that Scripture gives us a clear answer into what biblical rest can look like. The rest we see is not a nap time, as nice as they are. It's not doing a hobby. It's not binging The Office for the 8th time. While none of these are bad, except The Office one. I mean, come on, do you have to watch it 8 times? There's other shows out there. They don't reflect on the meaning of what I think biblical rest is. I think what we see in Scripture is this. Rest is when a person takes time to be apart from others and distractions to reflect on the work that God is doing in their lives. And I just want to say that one more time. Rest is when a person takes time to be apart from distractions and other people and reflect on the work that God is doing in their lives. Now that's great, but here's the hard part. Actually doing it. Practically applying this idea of biblical rest is not an easy task. By taking to heart the idea of biblical rest, we'll have to give up on the constant grind of work. We'll have to put away distractions. We'll have to set aside time out of our already very busy lives. We will potentially fall a little behind others in the workplace. But it's okay. And I know what I'm about to say is probably going to sound cheesy, but stick with me. When we start focusing more time on our relationship with God, He'll provide for us. Those raises and promotions that you're working hard for, he'll reward you with those potentially. I'm not saying he will, but from what I've seen from people, when they truly dedicate their time to being closer with God, God works in their lives in ways that they couldn't even think of. Also, spending time with God in this restful state helps us to shake off any doubts that we may be having about him, any doubts about if he's actually there, which I fall into often. Our relationship with God also gets more personal. You don't know someone by just casually and occasionally saying hi to them or checking in on them, but instead it's a developing relationship. And this time of rest helps us to reflect on the work that God is doing in our lives and see how much he's been a part of our lives. And it helps us to feel more connected, and our relationship becomes more personal. It's not easy to rest. Trust me, it's not. As a college student, you constantly are going and going and going. It's so hard to rest at times, but trust me, it is so worth it in the end. I want to leave you with these words from Jesus as you take time to think about what rest is going to look like in your life. Jesus says, "Come to me, all who are weary and burdened, and I will give you rest. Take my yoke upon you and learn from me, for I am gentle and humble in heart, and you will find rest in your souls. For my yoke is easy and my burden is light." With that, I want to transition into our time of a panel discussion. We're going to have Vince and Emma come on, and we're just going to talk through some more things about rest. If you guys have any questions, feel free to drop them in the chat. We're going to be checking it, and we want to hear from you. Whether it's wanting practical advice about how to rest in your life, stories about how you're supposed to rest or how you have, we'd love to hear from you. But Vince, I'll let you take it away.
Yeah, thanks, Andrew. That was excellent. It's a topic. Yeah, we spend a lot of time in Dot Church, talking about the hot topics and the controversial things. It is kind of nice to step back and kind of take a pastoral moment. So we appreciate that. Tell us a little bit about yourself. Did you grow up in the church? When did you become Christian? What was a decision like to, go to Moody and, pursue ministry? Just give us a little bit of background.
Yeah. So I have grown up in the church all of my life. Went to a church called Woodside Bible Church in Michigan, and I have grown up there. I love it. And my decision to go to Moody is something that I decided basically when I was in 5th grade. I had a leader in 5th grade who, at the end of the year, he left to go to Moody, and the name had always been in my mind. And I just had a want to be a pastor. And so because of that, my sights were always fixed on going to be a pastor, and the name Moody was always there. And so I pursued it, and the Lord opened doors for me to be able to attend there and study there.
And then this topic of rest, for you personally, why did you choose to talk about this tonight? What is it about the topic that resonates with you, or that you want to talk about it?
So I just came out of a very busy semester. When I started writing this, I was in the middle of it, and it was something that I needed to hear for myself. Is like, how do I rest, and what does the Bible say about rest? And so by going through that, I basically was trying to just preach to myself, and what I took away from that was so valuable that I also just wanted to share it with Dot Church and the community here.
Mm-hmm. And then you talked about how sometimes church leaders, pastors in particular, follow that kind of cultural model of pushing and driving and being driven, and sometimes they'll burn out. And you mentioned how that's bad for a congregation. First of all, have you seen that in your experience in the church? And secondly, what types of negative effect would a burned out pastor have on his congregation or her congregation?
Yeah. I think I've seen some examples of it. Nothing that comes like directly to mind is like this is an example, but you can tell when pastors are tired. You can tell after they've gone 8-10 weeks nonstop, like no breaks, anything. The enthusiasm isn't always there, and I get that people have hard weeks and stuff like that. But for me, I can just see like how people, they get tired and they get burnt out. Our church tried to, or is currently doing something for pastors where it gives them a place to go. It's like a retreat kind of thing, to help prevent that kind of burnout. But I think some of the church hurt, to answer the second part of your question, that I know can exist from pastors burning out is it becomes more of a job than caring for a flock, which is why a lot of pastors go into it, is to care for people, but they will be consumed by the numbers, the attendance numbers, the number of campuses, the size of the church, and because of that, that's what consumes them. That's what leads to the burnout. It's not so much that they're caring for people, it's now how can they get the most people to look the best at the end of the year report kind of thing.
Were you on last week when Lee Eklund was on, and then Emma, you jump into?
Yeah, I didn't get to this past week. I know I probably should have, but
Lee talked a lot about that.
Yeah.
Yeah, but yeah, go ahead, Emma.
No, so I was just thinking, and I think you're in a great place to speak on this because you're in Bible college right now. How then should we better prepare our people who are becoming pastors? How can is that something you're learning right now, or is it something you think that needs to be focused more on? Because again, referencing last week, we talked a lot about how, especially during this pandemic, a lot of pastors have become burnt out, and it's because they don't have the knowledge or the resources to kind of handle these big situations. So
yeah, so I'm glad you asked that, because I just finished a pastoral theology class at Moody, which is basically like how to be a pastor 101 kind of thing, and here's the hard parts of it. And one of the main things that my teacher talked about was burnout. He was a missionary in Japan for a while and pastoring churches there, and he had a major experience of burnout where he worked so hard and constantly tried to get these numbers up that the church basically fell apart because it was no longer worried about the people. And because of that, it's something he drilled into us constantly is like, give pastors time to rest, give them time with their families. The big thing that he talked about as well was time management for pastors, because and separating time for family and self and congregation. And I think those simple things can help prevent burnout, or at least minimize it. It's impossible to prevent it because people work hard no matter what. But yeah, that's what I've been learning so far. I think it's a growing issue as more churches are also concerned with growing, and how the mega church model is kind of what a lot of people strive after. Not that that's the best thing, but a lot of people do strive after this mega church model, where they want to get the attendance up, and so they'll work hard to try and do that and just fizzle out.
Don't you think it's hard to, Andrew, for pastors because it's like they're calling, right? I mean, I think it's hard for them to not admit sometimes that it is about the numbers and it's about the giving and all that, because they want to see it as this is pure ministry, and an example of my effectiveness is growth of the church. So that's do you think it makes that it makes it harder for them to kind of step back and give other people some control and take some time to rest?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, if you're ultimately I see the church as God's company, but if you are if we are seeing the church as a business, and if you are a CEO kind of thing, like, you don't want to hand the keys over to someone else for a little bit. Like, you want to be like, all right, I know what's going on, I know how we can improve, and I want to be able to do this. But it's just, yeah, it's hard to give over the keys. If that's kind of answers your question. I totally see that, and it totally makes sense.
Yeah. I really liked Kate's question because it speaks almost to my situation as well. When you are in ministry and when you do work at a church, even outside of being a pastor, with that mindset of hard work, being driven, constant motion, all this thing, how do you reconcile that and try to introduce an environment of rest when the people who look more productive than you because they are not taking care of themselves are getting picked over you because you are doing what you're supposed to do and resting?
Yeah, and that's kind of why I wanted to talk about the end, kind of like the provision of God, right? Is you can only work so hard, but we see even in that Genesis account that I read, God being an all-powerful being who created the earth. Like if you think that he can create the earth and not, like I hate saying the word reward because of the whole all
Right.
that, but he'll bless you and stuff like that if you spend more time with him. It's just kind of how a relationship works. That's why I wanted to throw that in there, because it's hard not to work, because that's how the world portrays it, as like work harder, get paid more, be in a better position. But because we have God, which is a whole nother factor that the world doesn't have, we get to see things a little bit differently in that way.
And I think your example of Jesus is compelling too, because the times that Jesus stepped back and went to solitary places and was alone, during those hours, there were people who weren't getting healed. There was needs that were going unmet. And if Jesus could step back, I mean, who are you to say, well, I can't, I'm far too important,
I mean, the church is going to work whether or not we are a part of it. It helps when we're a part of it, but it's not going to fall apart. Which is encouraging for me. Even like I'm not in a pastoral position yet, as I'm still in school, but even as a volunteer, like I want to do a lot. Even for Dot Church, I want to do a lot, but I have to recognize like this whole thing isn't going to fall apart if I don't do this task that came up that needs to be done. Like somebody else can do it. Emma, I'm sure you can also resonate with that, as I know both you and me have done a lot of stuff, and Vince as well, for everything. So,
Right.
yeah.
Yeah, I liked the hand over the keys thing because it is hard sometimes. You think, if not me, who else? And I think, too, as the younger generations were brought up, there's this instillment of you have to work hard. People are rewarded for like burning themselves out. Topics of conversation are of how tired you are from your week of work, and people brag about that. They're like, oh well, I only got 4 hours of sleep. It's like, oh well, I haven't slept in 2 days. Like,
Yeah.
It's a source of pride for people. And so you have like, and when I'm just like, well, I managed my time wisely and I got 8 hours, they're like, oh, you probably aren't doing enough. I'm like, oh.
Yeah.
It's the American way. Couple of good questions, one from Frankie, one from Garrett. Frankie asks, are there particular signs of exhaustion we should watch for in our own spiritual lives? Good question. For example, being tired is one thing, and worn out from a physical activity is another, but how can we check our spirit for exhaustion?
Yeah.
That's a really good question. Go for it, Pastor.
I would say, how close do you feel to God? It's not a perfect gauge, but if you are feeling disconnected and you're feeling just like, he's not working, he's not there, that I think is a sign to take a step back and say, what's going on right now? Like, what am I, and being spiritually tired is so different than being physically tired, because being spiritually tired doesn't necessarily mean you're doing too much spiritual stuff. I think it's kind of the opposite in being spiritually tired of you're not doing enough to strengthen your relationship with God.
Okay.
Yeah, no, and I liked Garrett's question too, because it speaks to kind of the culture of a church. And he said, how do we reconcile the go get everyone saved energy of some faith churches / traditions with the rest of God?
Yeah. Let me look at that question real fast.
Yeah.
It's how can we contribute to it? A healthy culture of rest. That's the question you're looking at, right?
Yeah, there was an earlier one, but that one's good
Oh,
too.
okay. Sorry. Oh,
Yeah.
I see. Okay, cool.
Oh yeah.
Vince, do you have any answers to that one? That's a good question.
Go ahead.
I think too, it's again looking inward. If we're going to contribute and if we're going to give spiritually, we need to be filled spiritually. We can't give what we don't have. And it's kind of a weird concept because you almost have to think a little selfishly at that point. It's like, I can't go out and evangelize and share the word of Christ if I'm not filled with his spirit. And so if that's the case, then I need to take a second to figure out why, and then to turn that around. And so,
or you could become a Calvinist and just believe that God's going to say he's going to say. So, don't worry about it. Yeah.
Don't worry about it. Who else got it?
Yeah.
If you want to take the easy road, I guess.
Yeah. So Garrett's other question is, how can people in the congregation contribute to a healthy cultural rest? Mm-hmm. Some people might be, not really comfortable with talking to some of their leaders in the church to say, hey, you're hitting it too hard, then let you. So, just generally speaking, anything the people in the pews can do.
I think it happens one of two ways. I think it either happens from a top down where, whoever's in charge is encouraging the people in the position below them to rest more. And then they're encouraging people below them to rest more. And then people below them are seeing them rest more. And so they promote that culture and just develops into this, okay, we don't have to work ourselves out. I think the other way that can happen, I think the way that's more likely to happen is from the bottom up, where, the congregants are, showing this time of rest and how it's productive. And then people are seeing that, and then it kind of goes the opposite way. I think, it has to start with someone, and it doesn't have to be an instant revival in the church, but it takes, a small group of people that are meeting to devote their time to rest. And then, maybe a pastor will see that and see how they're functioning and how their lives are going. He'll be like, oh, shoot, I need to be doing more of that kind of thing. So I think there's multiple ways people can contribute to it. It's just going to take, a group of people to do it.
Mm-hmm. I love this question from Kate. She says, but what about Jesus's call to count the cost and carry your cross? Those are arguments I've heard for promoting a culture of constant work.
I think there's a difference between, burning yourself out and, carrying a cross or counting the cost. Being tired and being burnt out doesn't have to be a cost. I think into what those are referring to, especially count the cost. I think that's a Paul thing, is he's in prison writing that. He is being physically beaten down and abused and is probably one of the most miserable humans on earth. Aside from having, God and stuff like that. But I don't think they correlate, because one is the context of being written of being in prison and being persecuted for your faith, and one is being burnt out in the church. There's just I think too much of a difference there, and why I don't think they're super valid arguments.
No, that's good. Yeah, let's see. Sorry, one more came in. I love this thought from Beverly. She said, food for thought. Research actually shows that the most successful people aren't actually that busy because they operate really efficiently. They rest just as hard as they work and oscillate between their either beast mode, concentration and productivity, and complete rest. And when they're working, they do it in the most efficient way possible. Yeah, I think that's so true. It's like work hard, play hard, but really eloquently put.
Yes. Yeah. I think though that's not the side that's promoted, right? whenever you see something about Bill Gates, they show how hard he's working in his garage trying to build what he has now. You see, Elon Musk or something, it shows like how hard he's worked to get where he is and how much he's doing and all that stuff. It's never like the rest and the relaxation and the time away part that is ever emphasized.
Mm-hmm. Andrew, you talked a lot about this, what the rest, it's different than binging on Netflix or, just taking a power nap. You said it's time, you take time to reflect on what God's doing in your life. Okay. And you gave a couple of like practical examples of that, but how is that different than, like, a lot of people on the call would know what like quiet time is, right? Where you take a period of time every day and, set it aside for just kind of you and God. How is this different? What you're describing different than like a traditional quiet time?
I think it can be. It doesn't have to be. I would say this time pretty much reflects a quiet time. It's just that intentional time to really reflect on like what God is doing in your life personally. Not reading scripture necessarily. It's good, and I think it should be a part of it, absolutely. Not just going through a Bible study or something like that, but it's more personal. It's what is God doing in my life right now? The times when I felt most far away from God, and then done that exercise of like looking for the little things that God is doing, that's what oftentimes recenters me and kind of brings me back of like, oh, God is working in my life. And it rejuvenates me. And something I'd encourage anyone who's listening to do is like in the next week before next Tuesday, like take time to like intentionally throughout your week see how God is doing little things, because a lot of times God works in the very small things and not just like the massive ways. Like, yeah, sure, you hear stories about $100 bill getting flown through your window when you need it, but then you also hear the stories of like, for me personally, when I'm at work, I work at Trader Joe's. It's pretty great, but a lot of times I want to try and engage my coworkers in conversations about Jesus. And a lot of times I feel defeated. But then when I start, thinking about the conversation I've had, like, no, like this was good. Like this was a small conversation about Jesus. And that's all that I was asking for, kind of thing. But I didn't see that when I was just looking for the big picture of, I want you to get saved right now.
Yeah.
So, yeah.
Oh, that's awesome. I want to close this out and get your last thoughts on this. I love what Christine put in here. She gave us some great signs that we can look for of us not getting enough rest. So she says, losing sight of what we enjoy in our work, finding even the things we enjoy doing becoming a chore, failing to give people our attention and presence, when we are impaired in our ability to hear God's voice and discern his movement in our lives, become obsessive about the to-do list, or losing touch with the human limits that are meant to keep us in touch with God.
I mean, just so good. I have no disagreements with that whatsoever. It's so true. All of those things are just so solid about ways to check ourselves. I think what's important though is finding a way to check ourselves. Like those are great things, but a lot of times we don't recognize that. So it's kind of like, how do you check that in your lives?
Right. Is there like how often should we be checking in with ourselves? Because like there are some things like you need to check in every day and some things you need to check in once a week. Is this something that needs to be done? How often?
For me, there's no set like do it this often. In scripture we see the Sabbath as one day a week. And throughout this past school year, what I tried to do was set one day a week where I didn't do any like schoolwork or anything like that. I spent time to intentionally, that time that I may have been doing schoolwork or reading or watching Netflix, spending that time instead reading scripture. And that helped me a lot, is just getting into a routine of that time to do it. So I did it once a week. Some people can do it every morning during their quiet time. It really is just like, it depends on the person and how much time they want to focus on it. I would say probably at least try and do it once a month, but I think weekly is pretty good.
Yeah, no, I like that.
So before I turn it over to Christy, who's going to kind of close us in prayer, Andrew, if there's one thing you want people to remember from tonight's discussion, what would it be? Like, what's your nugget?
My nugget. I honestly, I'm just gonna say what I said earlier. Is let me find it. Hold on. Where did I put it? Basically, I can't find it. Being or taking rest can be hard, but a lot of times the hard things are worth it. And especially in rest and reflecting on what God has done for you strengthens your relationship so much, and it's so important. So I would just, I'd say take that time to rest and reflect on what God is doing in your life. And I guarantee you will feel closer in your relationship with God.